Hey, it's Mike. How are you? Thanks for checking out this presentation on audience and citation. We're moving away from the narrative style that we used in Unit 1, and we're moving more towards a citation and research-based set of papers for Units 2 through 4. So it's important when you're using citation and research to keep your audience in mind. And it's also important to keep your audience in mind anytime we're doing any sort of academic writing. So this is to clear everything up and to give you some hints and guidelines that are going to be helpful for the next 3 papers and beyond. Since I'm assigning all these papers and I'm doing all the grading, it might be natural for you to assume that I am the audience. That's true to an extent, but anytime you're doing academic argument, anytime you're doing any sort of academic writing, you're engaging in a much larger audience. What you're doing is you're entering into a discussion with everyone who's written on your topic. If you post your paper online, if you enter it into a contest, submit it to a journal, something like this, then you're in a much larger forum than just me reading your papers. So assume that the audience is interested in what you have to say and they know a little bit less than you do. You're an expert because you've done all the research. You want to strive to be clear with your prose and especially with your citation. You want to make sure that the audience is able to keep up with you, so you need to provide them with everything they need. Sometimes it's hard to do that because when you spend time with your sources, you start to become really familiar with your sources, and you forget that not everybody is as familiar with these sources as you have become. So this leads to a lack of clarity in your presentation sometimes. One way to prevent this lack of clarity is by using signal phrases. A signal phrase is your brief introductory phrase. It's in the same sentence as your quotation. It's an introduction. So according to so-and-so says, or so-and-so states. These are just some of the many signal phrases. When you use a signal phrase, it provides a brief bit of context for your quote. That context allows your audience to understand how your citation supports your assertions. And it's always better to use a brief signal phrase like this than to drop a quote into your paper unintroduced. That can be a little bit confusing because then the audience of your paper doesn't know who's speaking. So you want to make sure that we're going to use signal phrases in tandem with MLA in-text citation. MLA, of course, stands for Modern Language Association. That's the style of citation that we use at Holyoke Community College in our academic papers. MLA in-text citation guidelines specify that you have to use the author's name and, when applicable, the page number when you're quoting or paraphrasing a source. I say when applicable because if a web page doesn't have a page number, you don't have to invent one. Right? A lot of web pages are just one long page, so there's no need to include page numbers in instances like that. You can include the author's name and, when applicable, the page number either in the signal phrase or parenthetically. And I say that with a caveat. You should always use parentheses for your page number when you're using a paged source. And I'll show you why in a couple of minutes. So here's a quote from one of my old professors, Dave Kress, who once said, take the exact opposite of what you said and you'd be right. Let's say that this is on page 77 of a book. So if this quote appears just as it is, it's really confusing because we don't know who's speaking. When I'm reading your paper, my assumption is that you're the author, you're the writer. And when you use citation, I'm happy because you're supporting your ideas with evidence, but you have to be really clear. So if this quote just appears without a signal phrase, without an introduction, it's confusing to me and it throws me off track because I don't know who's talking. So you always have to do that introduction. We're going to look at a few different ways to present this quote properly. If it's like this and the in-text citation is at the very end, again, it doesn't seem like you're taking the audience into consideration. And that's what we're striving to do. We're trying to be clear. We're trying to keep the audience in mind. I have to read this quote, then I find out who's speaking at the end, and I have to go back and read it again now that I know who the speaker is. It's not the most efficient way to get your point across. So this doesn't appear to take the audience into consideration. Whereas this way, the first time you use an author's name, according to author Dave Kress, this is the first time he's introduced, and all of a sudden I have a credential. I'm like, oh, this guy's an author. Okay. And that helps to provide context. Now compare this example here to this next one. According to author Dave Kress on page 77 of his book, right? This one reads a lot differently than the previous one. This one is longer, and on page 77 of his book feels a little extraneous. You can say the exact same thing by putting it parenthetically at the end. And the quote isn't going to be as obscured by all the verbiage the way it is here, right? So be considerate of your audience. Give them the information that they need and be concise. Always put your page numbers parenthetically at the end. Technically this might be correct, but this is really cumbersome. Always put those page numbers in the end. So with the first time quotes, the first time you mention an author, give the author's full name in the signal phrase because that's the reader's introduction to that author. Briefly state their credentials. That's part of the introduction. And again, page numbers in parentheses to ensure easy readability. Now, this is for first-time quotes. Subsequent uses, you don't have to give the credential. Subsequent uses, you don't have to use the full name. Here's Dave Kress's quote once again. Let's say that we've already introduced him in a previous quote. Just something simple like this. Kress states. We have that page number at the end where it's not going to be distracting. But since we've already introduced him, we don't need to reintroduce the credential. So for subsequent uses of the same source, author's last name, we don't need the first name or credentials. And again, we're keeping that page number parenthetical. So you aren't required to use the author's name in a signal phrase every time you use a citation. However, MLA specifications are that you use the author's name each time you cite. This might seem a little bit confusing, so I'm going to show you an example here. By mixing up the way that you do this, you're a good MC and your flow is silly. Right? Mixing it up, keeping the audience interested. But you're always using that signal phrase to be considerate of the reader. So you don't have to use the author's name in a signal phrase, but you have to include the author's name when you cite. So here's how you do it. The author states, we still have our signal phrase here, but the author's name is parenthetical. This is correct under MLA citation guidelines. And this keeps the reader engaged because you're mixing things up a little bit. States and says, again, aren't the only signal phrases available. You can check out Monmouth University's signal phrase page. You can check out Fred Cooksey's Quick and Dirty, the text that I assigned. It's really easy to find more examples of signal phrases if you want to mix it up even more. So that's quotation. Sometimes you want to take a quote and you want to put it into your own words. When you do that, you still have to give credit where credit is due. And that's called paraphrasing. And again, mixing up your approach keeps your readers interested. You're a good MC when you do this. Full MLA citation, so we still need author's name and, when applicable, page number. Two different ways to paraphrase. You can use the author's name in the paraphrase like this, according to Kress. The statement was diametrically opposed to the truth of the matter. Or alternately, you can not use the author's name at all. You can do one of these. According to the author, the statement was diametrically opposed to the truth of the matter. Both ways, though, are using correct MLA citation. Author's name, page number. So to wrap things up for you, using a variety of concise styles is going to keep your readers engaged. If you need to review this, you can always rewatch this video. It's in your text. It's in Quick and Dirty. It's also available to you on the Purdue Owl Labs MLA page. If you pretty much type in any MLA page into your, or MLA in-text citation into your search bar, you'll come up with this information. This isn't the sort of stuff you have to memorize necessarily. You just need to know how to use this. So use these resources. If you can't memorize all this stuff, don't worry. It's all here for you online and in your text. If you have questions or concerns, I'm at mfournier@hcc.edu. So good luck to you. Let me know if you have questions. Thanks for watching.